Welcome back. So I thought I'd start out by showing you how I've been customizing these screens in the Motec software specifically for our needs. And so this is the one I've been doing now initially. So I got the various different gauges on there, engine RPM and boost pressure and things like that. But anyways, I'll just show you kind of how you can go through here and you can choose different data elements that you want to chart out there, and you can put the different ranges on there. You can choose you know, what the scaling is on there. Like in this case, this is boost, and you can choose PSI or kilopascals or millibars or whatever you want on there, and then you can name that particular gauge, and you can do a bunch of other different things like set how many different data points are displayed in the gauge, and font sizes and things like that. And you can also set different color bands for limits if you want to show where there's a problem. Like for example over here on coolant temp, you can see in the color bands there you can set when it's too cool, set it to blue, and it's too hot, set it to red, kind of thing. So it's pretty neat to be able to customize this. So I've spent quite a bit of time just laying this out, and you can see you can actually move these around and resize them. So I've set that all up. So this is basically, this particular layout's for the tablet in landscape mode, and you see all the different information we have on there is fairly relevant. And then down here we have just sort of status messages. So the run switch just says whether the kill switch for the engine is on or not. And then we have this time graph, and so here you can display historical information as the engine is running. You can basically go and see all the different data points being plotted out here. So up the top I got boost pressures, and then temperatures, and then engine oil and coolant temperatures, and then down the bottom here fuel flow and RPM. And I can add more stuff later. And this is going to be how it looks in the portrait mode, which is how we'll probably be running it. So I've created basically a sort of similar layout for portrait mode, and here the gauges, the same gauges but just sort of laid out slightly differently. So they look good in the portrait setup. And unfortunately I didn't have any data to show on you here, because I had everything captured, and then I hooked the ECU up again, and of course when I hooked it up after we ran the engine, everything that was captured in there got lost because I didn't actually save it. And again, that's one of the things of being new to something. You don't know how to save everything or what you need to save and stuff, so lost the data, but kept all the layouts and stuff. Anyway, so just to show you some more around this software, there's all kinds of information. There's something like 800 different data elements that you can access off the ECU, and you can display them in tables or charts or gauges. So there's all kinds of different ways of looking at the data, and you can customize all these views depending on what type of thing you're trying to do on that given view. Like you might be tuning fuel, or you might be adjusting boost, or looking at timing or something like that. So there's basically a bunch of screens that they create for you, and then you can customize and create your own. So anyway, just to show you through a little bit more of that, I'm spending a lot of time, or have been spending a little bit of time actually, just learning all this and watching a few YouTube tutorials and stuff on how to get around all this. So there's another sort of custom gauge screen that they set up for you. You can obviously go and modify that, but the one that I did was just sort of done from scratch and just picked out the data elements that we wanted, or at least I wanted to be able to see. So that's what we'll be going with, and I think it's neat and tidy and gives us what we need, and we can add more stuff later. And same with the graph here, and you can customize all this. As you see, you can create different groupings, and then you can just add different data elements to show, and once you've added one, you can set what the parameters are for that, like the scaling and obviously colors and all that good stuff. So it gives you a ton of flexibility in customizing exactly how you want your layouts to look, and to give you just the information that you need to see at any given time. And you can set alarms and all sorts of different stuff. So as I said, I've still got a lot of learning to do, but slowly working my way through it, and eventually I'd like to be able to learn actually how to do tweak tuning the engine as well, instead of just being able to look at the information that's coming out of it. Anyway, so that's a bit of a brief on that, and on to actually seeing the engine running with a prop. So this is not the first time we've had the prop on and running, but it's the first time we've had it running with the engine tuned and able to bring the engine out of idle. And we had actually quite a lot of success on this. We managed to bring the engine all the way up to 2900 RPM, and we could have brought it further. We were just monitoring things as it went along. And there's, you can see the screen there with the different layouts. So this is just idling right now. It's a little bit rough still when it's idling. It still needs to be tuned at idle, but boy, when it comes up anything over about 1200 RPM and it goes out of idle, it's just super smooth. There's no vibration, and there's hardly any engine noise at all. It's mainly just prop noise, sort of from the prop tips, even though we're not taking it too high. And here you can see what it looks like from the outside, and I'll let you have a listen. So Jeff was running that then, and the most he took it to was about 2000 RPM. So here we are back inside, and this is going to be a bit of a slow-mo here, so you can see how the belts are operating. And it's kind of nice to be able to see this. And again, this is at idle, and this is when it has any sort of vibration or movement, and it all goes away once we get the RPMs up a little bit. And as I say, I think we're going to be able to tune it out a little bit, so or tune it so the idle is much smoother, or as smooth as what it is when it's running a little faster. And so we managed to get it. The best we saw was 2900 RPM, and it was super smooth. We had 5 pounds of boost on turbo 1 and 10 pounds of boost on turbo 2, and basically those two can double, so we got enough room for 10 on turbo 1 and 20 pounds of boost on turbo 2. And the calculations I sort of came up with for that was around about somewhere between 200 and 260 horsepower at 2900 RPM, which is kind of like the cruise setting. And by putting a larger prop on there, or bigger blades, like longer chord blades, I think we can get even more power out of that, because the boost isn't really kicking up to where I want it to go yet, and that's because it's not loaded up enough. And meanwhile, the guys have been flying along with getting these plugs done for the ailerons. So the two bottom ones are already getting waxed there, as you can see, and the two upper ones are getting close and ready for that, just getting their final round of sanding. Already had the two coats of primer on there, so they're not far away from being ready to be waxed. And as you can see in this next video, a little bit further along, this is Thursday, and so the guys have got the rubber profile around the edge there, so those two are now ready to have the molds pulled, and the other two aren't far behind. And while you're looking at this, so just a little bit more information on the engine. So I really think right now that we just don't have enough prop for it. I think we can go with a larger prop, and I think we're going to be able to get the performance that we really want out of it. So you'll see more of that in a little bit. But and also meanwhile, so Jeff's been starting to do some of the rigging for the aileron pulley controls. So you can see in there, he's basically got it running through some of the pulleys in there and down through into the bottom of the keel, just making sure everything's aligned nicely. As you can see, it's looking good in there. And so the next thing is, what do we got here? So back on the engine. So ultimately what ended up happening was we ran it again for a little while at 2900 RPM, and ultimately we ended up getting an oil leak in the upper housing of the reduction drive, because the governor was pushing, we think, well over 200 psi, and the seals that we had weren't able to hold that, and it turns out the ones that Mark had spec'd were only able to handle about 60 psi, so now we have to wait for some new seals. And I put this back together just to test it again, and it worked fine, except once you put a bunch of air pressure on there, eventually it sort of leaked out. So anyway, we need some new seals, and then we'll get it back on there and be able to run some more data and give you some really good numbers once we get it up to full power. Anyway, that's our update for this week, and thanks again for watching.